Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round 6 coverage of my games from the 2018 Western States Open held in Reno, Nevada. So round 6 was held Sunday afternoon at 4:30. The Sunday morning game was held at 9:30 a.m., slightly earlier than the previous day, and that had been a long game, so I had gotten a good workout already today, and I didn't have much of a break between rounds. But I was still feeling okay about my chess at this point. Sometimes I get a little foggy towards the end of a tournament, but in this case, I felt like I'd found some interesting tactical ideas in my round 5 game, even though I ended up losing. I played an interesting game. So I was still feeling good about my prospects in this game. My opponent with the white pieces had a rating of 1711. So a lower rated player. My rating for this tournament was 1861. But at a score of 2.5 after 5 rounds as well, he's obviously in good form. He started off with e4. I played e6. And now I went knight c3. This is kind of an interesting way to play. He is preparing to play the two knights attack against the French. And I asked him why he played this move instead of knight to f3 after the game. We had a chance to talk a bit. Because knight f3 is the usual way to get to this. And he said, well, black has the opportunity to transpose into the Sicilian. And if I went for a Sicilian, he wanted to keep open the option of playing f4 here and going for a Grand Prix attack. He likes that system against the Sicilian. So, interesting way to play. I wasn't intending to transpose into the Sicilian, however. I was keeping it in the French lines, and he goes with knight f3. So this is the two knights attack against the French. It's an interesting line. It's okay if black knows how to. It's okay for black if black knows how to play this, but it is easy for black to get into trouble. The combination of this pawn here and the knight here is already putting a lot of pressure on the center, and the move c5, which is a kind of typical French move, you might want to play it right away. I've made that mistake myself. Is actually a mistake because of this weakness. After you play c5, white can take on d5. You take back with a pawn, and then he can bring the bishop out with check. And it's difficult to hold on to that pawn. If you block the check with the bishop, that pawn is just hanging. So that pressure on the center is pretty serious. But I had played this before. I had faced this before because I have an opponent at my local chess club who likes to play the two knights attack against the French. So I had learned that the move for black here is knight to f6. I think this is the best reply. And if white plays e5, as in the game, then your knight just drops back. So we'll see that. My opponent at the local chess club actually doesn't push, but takes here. And this transposes after black takes back. White can play d4, black can go with bishop d6, and we've actually transposed into a line of the exchange variation of the French defense. So this is also okay for black. But let's get back to the game. I just wanted to mention that in case they take. That's what you do. He pushed, and then the knight drops back to d7 at this point. So typical kind of French structure is shaping up here with these advanced pawns chasing the knight away. But white is planning, and black is planning to counter that center, undermine the center with c5. And in fact, c5 can be played immediately. Now this position is new to me, at least over the board. I'd kind of looked at it and seen that I had normal moves here when I was researching what to play against the two knights attack. But I didn't remember any details. And as I was facing this position over the board, I was sort of worried about c5 followed by knight to b5. Well, let's put it on. Because this is sometimes an idea. The knight on b5 can't really. It's looking to hop into this d6 square and check the king. But in this case, that square is still covered, so I can actually kick the knight, force him to come here or retreat, and then I've given up the bishop pair, but I've also reclaimed this f6 square for me by chasing his pawn away, or pulling his pawn away from e5. So that square is now available for my pieces, and this pawn here might become weak in the long run. I might get a pawn. This actually is not a particular, not a big advantage for black, so maybe white gets compensation for the pawn if I grab it, but it seems like black is just fine. So c5 is the main move there, and what I should have played. But as I said, I was facing this over the board, and I did like that knight b5 move, so I played a6 to prevent it. It's a bit of a slow move, but on the other hand, this move is often useful, so it's not giving up any big advantage to white. But white continues to develop logically. Bishop d3, I go c5 now, white takes. And here's a little move order wrinkle you can think about when you're playing the French defense. Knight to c6 is a good move here. You don't have to take that pawn back right away because it's not so easy for white to defend it. After knight c6, he can't play b4, for example, to hold on to it. So you're not forced to grab that pawn right away, and you can play a developing move. But bishop takes c5, which I played in the game, is also okay. Let's see, white castled here. I completed my development knight c6, and knight c6 is also, no, well, not completed my development because I still have to worry about this bishop here. But anyway, the two knights are ganging up on the center, so this forces white to do something about that. He played bishop f4, and I played queen c7 to put even more pressure on the pawn. I wanted to mention here, I thought about castling first, but actually castling right here is a mistake, and if you want to pause the video here, you might want to try and figure out why that's a problem. Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. If I castle, white has the Greek gift sacrifice. This is often the case in the French defense. Sort of the prerequisites for it are these pieces in this kind of configuration. The knight ready to hop into g4, having control of g5, having control of that g5 square, having the bishop on this diagonal, and having the queen ready to come in is often the setup. And also the fact that the knight has been chased away from f6, so I don't have a defender over here. This is a setup for the Greek gift sacrifice. And the knight comes in with check. And yeah, black is just in big trouble. Even if you run out here, you get chased around, and white has a winning attack, although that is long and complicated here. I'll just show the line where the king goes back, because it's a kind of technique you should know about. You come in here with the queen, threatening mate, and there's actually no way to deal with the mate. Well, the chess engine gives queen takes knight as the way to deal with that. So we're, excluding giving up the queen for a piece. If you want to create an escape square for the king by moving the rook, here's the trick. Here's how white mates. So it's you take here on f7 first, drive the king here, come back, the king goes here. Now you come into h7, the king goes here, and now you deliver this check. And notice the knight is guarding this square, so the king has to step here. And the fact that there's no pawn here now means that queen takes g7 is mate. If you hadn't grabbed that pawn on f7, this would not have been a checkmate. But now that you grab it, and you have to remember to grab it first, then you get to this situation, and it's just a checkmate. Notice this pawn on e5 is blocking the king's escape there. So that's a forced mate from the point where black played rook to e8. So anyway, let's go back to the game. I just wanted to explain why I didn't castle there, and so I was looking around for another move. Yeah, castling is really not safe in this position, so I went with the queen c7. Now I'm going to come back to this point and discuss other alternatives, but first let's go through what happened in the game. It's kind of a logical sequence, so let's follow it all the way through. It's a logical sequence that has a surprise ending, so we'll set that up for you. So queen c7 is attacking this pawn, and I really expected him just to play rook to e1, but he didn't. He played bishop to g3. So now I've got 3 pieces attacking that pawn. He's got 2 pieces defending it, so I can just take it, and I did. So I grabbed with this knight, and he took once. I took back with the other knight. And then he played rook to e1. And I had calculated ahead this far. I noticed that there's this pin here, and he's piling up more pressure with the rook. But I had already realized that I could just bring my bishop back, which both defends the knight and breaks the pin. So in another move, I'll be able to move that knight away if he tries to, for example, bring more pressure to bear on the knight with some move like queen to e2. I can just move the knight away. So at this point, I was feeling like this game is almost in the bag. I've just captured a pawn here, and my development is not too far behind. I still need the castle, but for a good central pawn like that, it's worth giving up a move or two of development. But there is a tactical move here that White has, so I wanted to give you guys a chance to find the move. Can you find the best move for White in this position? Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. The answer is knight takes d5. And well, this is a very nice move, and I was impressed. My opponent did not have this in his preparation. He discovered this over the board. He spent about 20 minutes thinking about this position, and he was reasoning like this. He thought that he hadn't really done anything wrong, and there was no reason why he should be in a losing position so quickly. So he said, I'm just going to search until I find the right way to play this position, and he did finally come up with this answer. So good for him. Okay, so this is a forcing move. It's hitting my queen. And if I take it, which I did, I think there's nothing better. If I move the queen away, I guess you have to calculate all of these lines. If I move the queen away, well, I have to worry about losing the knight. So I guess really the only move that I can play that holds on to the knight, oh, maybe I could come up here too. But say I play some move with the queen that defends the knight, he can just drop his knight back, and he's equalized. He's probably better. He has a lead in development, and the material is equal. So that's all good for for White. In fact, his knight has better moves than that. If we look at that again, his knight can come forward and fork my pieces in here and stuff like that. It's not a good situation for me. So the best move here is just to take the knight, which I did. And then he played the move f4, which wins the piece back. And the game continued from here. I decided to castle to unpin, and he took the knight. But let's go back at this point and talk about this sequence of moves. Give a little more scrutiny to it. So we started at this position where I played queen to c7 to put pressure on that pawn and just win it. And it seems like that's not a particularly good move. In fact, after queen c7 and he plays bishop to g3, my chess engine is telling me the best move is to move my queen back to d8. So that's probably a mistake then. Although it didn't think it was a horrible move, it just didn't think it helped my cause. So one of the choices here is to play the move h6. And the idea with this is, say White continues with bishop to g3 as in the game, then you can castle. So I couldn't castle because of the Greek gift sacrifice, but once you played h6, that sacrifice is not on anymore, and it also takes away the square from the knight. So a good preparatory move, and it seems like black is fine. And now I can play moves like queen c7 and try and pile up on that pawn. So that's really how I should have played it. Let's look at the second point here. I played queen c7, and I was expecting him to play rook e1. Rook e1 is actually a fine move. And I asked him after the game why he didn't play this. And he said he was concerned about the move f6. The thing is, I realized this. His bishop is loose there. So if he takes the pawn, I can take the bishop. But actually, that is really dangerous, opening up the king side like that. So in fact, after f6, White really should just take that pawn. And say if I'm so bold as to grab the bishop here, this pawn could come forward and hit my rook. And then he can come in with knight takes d5. This is not even a sacrifice. This is the e-pawn is pinned. That pawn is just hanging there. And he's got, what, 3 pawns for his piece, plus he's got this advanced pawn over here. My king is, about to get slaughtered here, basically. My queen is under fire here. There's no good move for black in this position, and white should go on to win. So really, when he played this this bishop to g3 move, he really could have just defended the pawn. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, and that's pretty much a normal move. Although it turns out this is a good move too, but only if you see all the tactics. So after bishop g3, I mentioned the chess engine wants me to just move my queen back, but I went ahead and took. Oh, I didn't take with that knight. I took with the other knight. That's right. Let's see. Did I have an improvement for right? No, this is all good. I was going to say there was actually a place where white had an improvement, but this is all good for white. Right here, instead of playing rook e1, white can actually play knight takes d5 right here. That's why I didn't want to go over this before I showed you the game, because I didn't want to give away all these tactical ideas before I got to that critical point in the game. But already knight takes d5 is possible here. So say I take it, he can just take the knight. This is funny, but of course if I take back with the queen, he can skewer my queen and king. So effectively my knight is just loose there because the queen can't take back. So anyway, that already is winning for white, actually. The way he played it, it comes out more even. Let's see, he played with the rook. I mean, it's logical the way he played it, but the chess engine says this turns out to be okay for me. After rook e1 actually thinks I should play f6 here. Again, I would be reluctant to play that, but I guess I could get away with it here. If he comes out with the check, I could bring the knight in here. No, I can't do that because I don't know, this looks very risky to me. So anyway, I went bishop d6, and then he went knight takes d5. Yeah, and at this point, we're into that tactic. And this is how the game went. So he went f4. Yeah, there was one more improvement. Instead of playing f4 and getting the knight back right away, he could exchange first and play queen h5. Another way of getting a piece back. He's threatening the bishop with his queen, and it's pinned here, so I can't really do too much about it. Bishop e6, and rook takes, I guess, is more accurate than queen takes. And castling queenside, and it gives white a pretty significant advantage here. I guess, yeah, my king is not quite as safe as white's king, but the material is even. I do have an isolated pawn, and my bishop is looking worse than white's bishop, because white's bishop can attack this pawn, and my bishop is stuck defending. Yeah, maybe if he gets a solid blockade on this pawn, he can go into a good end game too. So anyway, that would be the way for white to get the biggest advantage out of this. But the way he played it, seemed pretty natural. Instead of exchanging first, he kept more material on. He just played f4 and made sure he got his piece back. And I went ahead and castled here, and he took. So at this point, I was a little worried. If I move my bishop away, he has the idea of pushing this pawn forward with kind of a double attack, right? The pawn comes forward, maybe it can take on f7, and he's also hitting my queen. So I threw in this move, queen b6 check. I think that was an important intermediate move to get a decent position. And he went bishop f2. Let's see, he could have considered moving his king in this position. Would have kept more material on. Let's see, then I could drop my bishop back, and they could bring his queen out. And the idea is that with two bishops and the queen, he's got some decent attacking chances here. This pawn is actually, kind of cramping my my position a bit. I can't land a piece here. I can't land a piece here or here because his bishop has control of this square and the pawn has control of that square. I wanted to play h6 here, But after bishop f4, this is starting to look a bit dangerous. You might even consider a sacrifice here. I have to keep my queen defending along the third rank here. That was one of the ideas of the queen on b6. Let's see. Although, yeah, the chess engine gives a funny line here with queen to f2 and queen to h4 as a way to kind of get out of trouble, and I guess that is a playable line. But it thinks the best defense is actually just to play g6, allow the queen to come in here, and then play bishop to e6, blockading the pawn. And it thinks this is, more or less even. Let's see. He went with the bishop check. I was just saying, I think White had more practical chances in that other line by keeping more material on. White has more attacking prospects. Here I block with the bishop, and he went ahead and traded. So now we're just down to a queen, a bishop, and 2 rooks for each side. And it's the same color bishop. He's in check, so his king gets out of check, and then I get to develop my bishop. So I finally got all my pieces developed. And he plays c3, so I don't have all this pressure against the c3 pawn. Also, it serves to blockade my pawn. But this is really a pretty even game. There may be a slight edge to White here because this pawn is inhibiting my defense a little bit, and my pawn is on a light square, so maybe it interferes with my bishop a little bit. But basically, a pretty even game. Let's see. I went. He went c3. Yeah, I went rook a to e8. I wanted to get pressure on this e pawn immediately. I was still worried about this idea of pushing on to e6 in some case. He gets in queen h5. I block with h6, which is okay here. He dropped his queen back to h4. I guess he was worried. I was actually thinking about just pushing this pawn forward and dissolving it in the right circumstance, so maybe that's his idea. If I push it forward right now, he could bring his queen to here, though, and line up this way. I want to not allow that. So I play for time a little bit. I play queen c7. Well, I'm ganging up on this e pawn, too. He played queen to d4, coming over and defending that pawn. And I went bishop to c6, so my pawn is solidly defended. He was attacking my pawn. He goes rook e3, so ideas of bringing the rook over to help in with the attack. And I went with rook e7. I was just going to double on the e file and just increase the pressure on this pawn, try and keep him tied up. Played rook a to e1, and I went rook f to e8. So we've doubled on the e file. And now he started bringing his king back. He's got control of this diagonal with the queen on it. So his king is safe, and he was thinking for the endgame the king would be better placed closer to the center, which is true. So let's see, I went queen c8. I'm just kind of maneuvering my queen around, seeing what I can do. I might put the queen on the e6 square, or I might shuffle the rooks and put the queen behind them. But it seems like I can't ever quite get enough pressure here. Well, in the right circumstance, maybe I can get in the move f6. After blockading that pawn, perhaps that becomes a possibility. But he played queen f4 here, and I went with bishop b5. I decided my life would be easier if I got rid of those bishops. He kept having to worry about his queen hopping on this diagonal. That makes it, difficult for me to push this pawn forward because I want to keep enough control over that diagonal to keep him from mating me. So I was offering the trade of the bishop. He moved the bishop away. If he had taken, actually taking is considered to be a pretty good move here. Let's back up. If he had taken, I was planning to take back with the pawn, and then, he could play something. Well, rook d3 is a good move here. If he played just anything, my idea was to move my queen up to the c5 square and offer this exchange of queens, and that would bring my pawns back together, and I would leave him with this isolated pawn. But, the chess engine gives this line with rook d3, and now that's no longer a good idea. Now if I go for queen c5, he takes, I take, his rook can come forward. Here, let's put that on the board. He takes, I take, his rook can come forward, defending his pawn from the side. so that this is securely defended and attacking my b pawn. And actually, white is in good shape and maybe winning there, but at least with a significant advantage. So I have to be careful. But I don't know. He might not have found that rook d3 move. And anyway, that was what I was thinking about. What he chose instead, though, is he chose to avoid the trade altogether and played bishop f5. So I moved my queen out of the way. He played queen back to g3, keeping an eye on this pawn, keeping it defended, whereas I'm trying to keep the pressure on it. But he's left off the fifth rank there, so I brought my queen forward, and I'm pinning this rook here. So I'm actually threatening to take the pawn once again. Let's see, he moved his king back to h1 to unpin, and then I pushed on with d4. So that was my idea. I had been trying to get this move in for a while, and now I finally have the opportunity. So he takes, and I take, and so I've gotten rid of my pawn weakness, and I left white with a pawn weakness, and I was going to try and play against that. He played b3 here, defending his b pawn that was under fire. I went with bishop c6. I was also hoping maybe to get something going on this diagonal. He went h4. This not a bad move. It gives his king a little bit of lift here, although it does create a potential weakness. But maybe he can get something out of pushing that forward as well. I went rook d8 here. He went rook d3, hitting my queen. Actually, I hadn't noticed this move, and I was scrambling around for an answer, but fortunately my queen can drop back and defend the rook. So he traded off like this and pushed on with e6. And now things are kind of turning drawish. I don't think we're getting to the point where there's not going to be a lot of force left and things are going to be too open. After the bishop f5 move, he'd actually offered a draw, so I declined. I was still thinking there was possibilities in the position. But anyway, I have to take here. He takes back. He actually took with the rook. That's right, he took with the rook. So I keep taking, and he takes, and I played king to h8, and there's really just nothing going on here. In fact, I think if anybody, white has the better chances once again, because his queen can come into this square and the bishop can come here and he can try and line up like that. So I have to play a bit cautiously to prevent that from happening, but I should be able to prevent that. So anyway, I offered to draw at this point and he accepted. So that's how the tournament ended. So I had a total of 3 points out of 6 possible, so 50%. And playing in Class A, that is an okay result for me. Although I had chances to do better, so I was a little bit disappointed. But overall, I felt like I'd played some decent chess. It turns out that I've been saying my rating for the tournament was 1861. That was using my published rating. So my actual rating at the time was 1933. I had this one tournament at my local chess club where I'd done extremely well, and so my rating had just jumped up like that in one tournament to 1933. So the result of this tournament was to drop my rating back down to 1912. So it was a loss of about 20 points on my rating, but 1912 is still a very good rating for me and a decent result for the tournament. In fact, 1933 was a new high in terms of my rating. My previous peak rating was back in April of 2013, so more than 5 years ago, when I reached a rating of 1929, and then it went down after that. So anyway, having a rating of 1912 is good, and I'm happy with the result, happy with the chess that I played. I could have done better, but I'm sure my opponents had chances as well, so that's just the way it goes. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this series, and I will see you again soon.